right here. I mean, you should know Bill Gates and Paul Allen founded Microsoft, but the rest of this stuff, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. You should know the types of OSs, these different compute platforms, the different types of classes of integrated systems, sure. You don't have to know that. Yeah, I mean, I try to avoid product-specific stuff, so yeah. But I mean, you should understand, this general architecture here that, how you fit LAN, SAN, storage management, these types of architectures. Again, you don't have to know these product-specific details, but just in general, these high-level architectures, how they fit together. So yeah, you should understand things like that Nutanix is a hyper-converged system, for example. And then, it has these types of characteristics. But, any more detail than that, I wouldn't expect you to know. You should understand, when we're talking about remote management, what we're talking about, these different capabilities, right? So you should understand, that these are all Linux systems, and Linus Torvalds invented Linux, and there's this thing called Red Hat, and it has CentOS and all these different things. So just, be aware at a high level all these different characteristics. Yeah, so you should understand Unix init and systemd and what the differences are. I would read that paper. Yeah, you should know at a high level what GNU is. Just, not more than what's on this page here. And then Mac OS, obviously, I'm not going to tell you, again, just at a high level, I wouldn't expect you to know a lot of detail. Again, Windows, you don't have to memorize all these things, but, just more. But yeah, the Windows AD, the hierarchy, the different definitions, that sort of thing you should know. What types of OS services exist and what they do. File systems, what different file system types are, like network file systems versus local file systems and what they do. The overall architecture, what these different pieces do. You might want to check out that article to understand this picture and what these different pieces do. So yeah, you should understand the major concepts of like VFS, what a superblock is, inode, dentry. I wouldn't worry about this too much, but yeah, you should know what a hard drive is. Yeah, if you don't know that. Okay, who knows what the material on the surface of a hard drive is?
Magnetic.
No, but what is it? Yes, it's magnetic, but what material is it?
Iron.
Iron oxide, it's rust. Iron oxide, which commonly known as rust. If you take metal and let it get rusty, these are very fine particles of rust coated onto this disk that gets magnetized. That's a 5 megabyte hard drive. Anyway, but yeah, you should understand this architecture, like what's the difference between a sector and a track and a cylinder, what we talked about. Let's see, what is a Dcache? And I know, so yeah, you should just be aware. I'm not going to ask you like down to the formatting the blocks and how many bits and all that stuff, but just more like these generic description type stuff. Don't memorize this part, but memorize this part. You see what I'm saying? So yeah, just the general characteristics of these different file systems and what they're good for. The storage networking stuff, you can remember these terms, and what is fiber channel, and what is a SAN, and how it all fits together. But when we get down to this level with NPort and, the different, connection stuff that happens and the authentication and, all the details. So you should know what a worldwide name is, but you don't have to know the format of it and, all these different addressing models and stuff. Don't bother with that. That's just too much overkill. It gets super complicated and it's just not worth it. Because fiber channel is kind of on the way out, right? Because it's just too complicated and too expensive, and you can use Ethernet switches to pretty much do the same thing. So that seems to be Now vSANs are kind of interesting because it's a virtualized version of all of this. But again, just at a high level, understand the concepts, but don't worry too much about the details of it. All right. So again, yeah, don't worry about the security stuff. Again, this stuff gets way too complicated. So you can skip that stuff. At this level, I don't know if there's that much here. This is kind of high level stuff. But yeah, you should know what Docker is and all the different characteristics and the technology. And, maybe some basic commands that you can run. I might ask something like that, like these types of commands, because it's very popular. So you should understand the basic architecture that, you know, they have these base images that get, you know, instantiated into some, you know, running image, and, you know, how this works you should understand. And, you know, what the Docker file does, so yeah, at a high level, again. And these different tools and what they're for. But yeah, now we did cover Ansible in some detail, so yeah, you should probably be familiar with, you know, the Ansible stuff we talked about, like what, you know, just, I think we had a homework assignment with Ansible too, so that should be pretty straightforward. So again, yeah, all this Active Directory stuff, kind of put that out of order, but, so just these high level concepts. And yeah, you don't have to know anything. We talked about Clicker, but that was mostly just an example, so you don't have to know anything about that. And then, I mean, we talked about Jenkins a bunch, so I don't know, I might put something basic on there, just check that out. All right, so that's there. All right, so next we talked about networking, yay, so.
Lecture 2.
What?
Lecture 2, right?
Yeah.
3.
Well, lecture 2, topic 3, lecture 3, topic 2, because the first lecture was just kind of anyway, we didn't cover any topics the first day. All right, so, you know, basically you should know everything on this page. Does anybody have any questions about this stuff? I mean, I'm not gonna ask you like how to parse IPv6 addresses, but you should be able to parse IPv4 addresses. I would expect that. You know, you guys are all graduate students. I mean, I would assume that you can decode a subnet mask and so forth at this level. So you should understand at a high level, so yeah, you don't have to remember the different weights of routing protocols. That would be torture. But you should understand these characteristics. Like bridging is layer 2, routing is layer 3, these sorts of things. You know, what is the difference between switching and routing, and what's the difference between an IGP and an EGP, and, you know, autonomous systems we talked about. So yeah, BGP, the fact that BGP is the only EGP, for example, that might be something. Classless routing we talked about, so yeah, know that. But yeah, basically, IPv4 subnetting is, you know, the main thing that would trip people up. But yeah, this part don't worry about. I'm not gonna ask any questions like that, route summarization, so don't worry about that. Yeah, don't worry about the IPv6 stuff. But yeah, just understand the characteristics, yeah, like these sorts of things. And then, you know, the general characteristics, like that OSPF always has an area 0 that everything has to attach to, that sort of thing. So these, you know, the basics, I would expect. But anything more than that, yeah, you don't have to go into the great detail. And so similarly, the BGP basics, I would expect. But then once we get into these, you know, extreme details, you don't have to know that. But yeah, there's high level stuff about, you know, that ISPs come in these tiers, and the, you know, tier 1s tier with all other tier 1s and so forth, that sort of thing. So the basics of switching, like the difference between a LAN and a VLAN, between a collision, a broadcast, and a spanning tree domain, that we, you know, I gave that example. What is VTP and what's it used for, and the different, you know, I'm not going to get into too much about these more advanced features like either channel, but just be aware that it's there. Probably not going to ask too much about these more advanced features. But yeah, you should understand, you know, spanning tree and just in general what it's for and what it does. And I'm not going to ask any scaling numbers because those things are always off. So let's see. So in general, these network architectures you should understand, especially relating to the layers, right? That you have core, aggregation, access, and what the characteristics of these different layers are. Like here, access layer features, aggregation features, and core features. So yeah, you should understand those. When we say quality of service, what are the different things that we mean? What is a clause network? What are the different architectures? You don't have to remember that poem though. So yeah, the characteristics of these types of architectures. So yeah, I'm not gonna ask you any specifics of, you know, Cisco ACI or anything like that, but yeah, you should understand this stuff about, you know, virtual networking and all these different components and identify them. Let's see, so the characteristics of these different models, maybe, I don't know, that's not too important. So for collaboration, I would expect that you to, you know, generally know what character, like, for example, that voice, when we're talking about collaboration, we mean these things and not, you know, something else. Like, we're not talking about configuring routers when we say collaboration. It's about these things. And then, you know, what are the characteristics of an enterprise campus? So again, you know, the core distribution access model and all the different components of it. The, you know, the architecture of these types of systems that we're talking about. So the overlay, underlay stuff, again, mostly just be aware of the taxonomy stuff, how we're dividing. So basically an overlay network, we're talking about VPNs. An underlay network, we're talking about, you know, the features on the routers that allow VPNs to work. It's the technology in the network is the underlay, whereas overlay is the stuff you're building on top. So we've got layer 2 overlays, layer 3 overlays. So at that level, I would expect you to know, but not much more than that. So yeah, these types of, you know, broad features, how you can combine layer 2, layer 3, the different types of overlays. And then for the SDN stuff, yeah, I'm not going to ask any questions about this stuff. That's a little too much. So for the SNMP stuff, just go through this deep dive and just be aware again at the high level, you know, things like what we've said. The netconf yang stuff, again, at a high level, know that what, you know, we're talking about a data model and a protocol and which one is which, and you know, the basics of how it works. But not more than that. I mean, you know, just be aware that, like, this is good, where the difference between SNMP and netconf, for example, and, you know, the different broad capabilities. So stuff like that. Again, not much deep, I'm not gonna ask you to write code or anything. All right, so we'll skip through that, and then what else we got? So yeah, I'm not gonna ask any ACI specific stuff. That was mostly just an example of what these things are used for. So for the network management stuff, yeah, no, I won't really ask anything there. But, you know, I do want you to, there will be material on this microservices article and some of the reading, but definitely, I mean, that's an important point. All right, so that's that one. All right, and that takes us to, all right, yeah, the client server stuff. We watched that keynote, remember? So yeah, I would maybe rewatch that video. So just be aware of these broad categories, like what's REST for, what is RAML, and some of the capabilities and characteristics. So yeah, just the characteristics here, you know, mostly what is it and what's it used for type of thing. All this stuff is fair game. Ajax, so all this stuff you should understand, yeah, the characteristics of XPath and XSLT. You know, the basic idea of JavaScript. I'm not going to go into writing code or anything, but just be aware of JavaScript and where it fits into the world. So yeah, we did a homework assignment on OSGI, so you should understand this architecture and framework and how the modules work. And you know, we had a homework assignment, so I would expect there might be a question on, you know, how to operate these things, what the life cycle type stuff. That might make a good test question to ask you about the life cycle, for example, different services. The camel architecture too is another good one, because that's kind of an important point. I won't ask anything like this, but this stuff here is all definitely fair game. So all these things are fair game. You should, yeah, definitely know all these things here. Know this example and be able to work through it, right? There will probably be an example, something like this on the exam where you actually have to do it. Right, so understand how these things work. So here, just understand like the characteristics that you know what CXF is and what it's for. And similarly here, just understand what we do, what are these things and what they do, where they fit into these architectures, that sort of thing. I'm not going to ask anything about Spring Framework or Glue or anything like that. Don't worry about that. And nothing about Oracle or any of that stuff. Don't worry about these. But maybe, you know, the PayPal one is relevant. I might ask you something about this. And, you know, this process and how it works and the flow, that sort of thing, because that's pretty popular. And then, yeah, maybe go through this tutorial again. All right, so that's that one. All right, so that takes us to the ERP, SCM, CRM class. So again, just be aware of these different platforms and what they do. I'm not gonna, this one is gonna be probably pretty light. I mean, there's not a lot here really, just a lot of high level stuff. But again, just be aware of these, like when we're talking about these different groupings, what they do and what the examples are of functionality. But yeah, this stuff is good. Like, what's a BI dashboard for? What's a KPI? Does everybody remember what's a KPI? Who remembers? Key performance indicator. Yeah, okay, good. What's a heat map and all these different things we talked about. But so yeah, broadly, what are these? When we're saying content management system or ECM, what are we talking about? Similarly, you know, these characteristics. So mostly this is the stuff you got to remember here. The rest of that stuff, not so much, but all this stuff is good. Maybe not so much there. Yeah, so there, and then, yeah, just maybe go through the Salesforce demo. There might be a question about that, just to show that, you know, you're familiar with the work. So yeah, that's not too bad. Now this one, all right, let's see, this was the UML. Yeah, so this stuff you just have to, you know all the modeling language stuff. So yeah, know these diagrams and what they're for and how they work. This BPMN stuff, yeah, you should just know all these different notations and what they're for, you know, all these different markers. There will definitely be questions about that on there. Tasks versus sub-processes we talked about. How you know, looping versus multiple instances. So just understand how all these things work. And what the different events are and how they fit together. But all this other stuff, yeah, so just go through, there's a couple of examples here. So you might want to work through these examples to feel comfortable. All right, so that got us to the midterm. Oh, we're just zipping right through this stuff, aren't we? This final should only take 15 minutes. So I'm thinking about doing the final online. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, that's better.
You like that better? Okay. It'll make it a lot easier to grade too. So it's actually kind of to your benefit because I have another class that's this 272 cybersecurity and it's online. So it's forcing me to do an online exam. So I just finished doing their midterm because their midterm is tomorrow. What a schedule. They're doing this whole semester, this whole class in 8 weeks. Very accelerated. But
so if multiple choice, in multiple choice question, if multiple answers will be correct, then how it will be graded in online?
No, one answer. You chose for final, you are going to give one answer correct.
So how it will be?
well,
and
yeah, I'm going to take that back because some of them do have multiple answers, but they're usually pretty obvious. I mean,
No, sometimes what happens, one correct we opted and another one might be wrong, so we cannot get half mark in online.
well, I have to see how it works. I'm not sure.
You get half mark even in physical exam.
Yeah, physical, and that's what is graded.
So at least can you mention which question has the answers?
Well, actually, if you've ever used it, if it's single answer, it's a radio button, but if it's multi-answer, it's a checkbox. So you can tell if it's single answer just by looking at it.
I have a question. What is the point of multiple answer? I just don't get it.
Because it's harder to answer.
Really hard to get
Reading of it is just too confused.
No, I might say something like, okay, let me give you an example. So I'll have a list that's something like get delete, remove, put, post, and make up something else, and then you pick which one of those are valid HTTP methods. No, they're not all, because I said remove.
That
That's
is
not.
the simple one, but there is some multiple choice that has 3 sentences each one that we need to figure it out.
I'll try to make it easier. Okay.
Yeah, this time is here.
All right. Well, this one I'll try to make it easier. Maybe I'll make it open book. How about that?
No, that will not help.
See, now everybody's all keen.
Not open book, open Google.
Open Google now. Come on.
Oh yeah, what will we do with this book?
All right. So, well, actually, I think when you do that online thing, your computer locks up and nothing.
Yeah.
It locks your whole thing. You can't do anything
We can do without that probably.
else. Right. All right. So now we're talking about the application lifecycle stuff. So yeah, be aware of this ALM process and different steps in it, and all the different stakeholders, and the pillars, and the let's see, so yeah, be aware of these stages. Be aware, definitely going, how these things flow. That should be, you should know that. Some of these, you should be able to at least explain in this much detail what these different models are. And then, obviously what DevOps is and how it goes into this loop. Some of these key concepts you should be able to explain. Why are we doing it? You don't have to know that. You should be able to, identify that these are build tools, for example, but not much more than that. I'm not going to ask you any more details of stuff like this. But just be aware that these are tools that do this sort of thing. But yeah, we had a homework assignment on Jenkins, so I would expect you to maybe answer some questions about that, and obviously what it's for and all the different capabilities. Right, so we talked about Jenkins quite a bit, so there might be some questions there. And then, so you should be able to, describe Scrum and, this process, for example. Also similarly for Kanban and its process. And that's it. Okay. All right, that takes us to the title for this one? All right, topic 7. Databases and query languages. So yeah, you should know everything about databases. But yeah, you should know these 12 rules. It's a good exam question, right? I won't ask you that, but okay, so yeah, Oracle databases and just in general or maybe, I don't know, this might be getting a little obsolete at this time, but so you should understand, the general structure. Oracle databases are still pretty popular in enterprises, so it's worth knowing, the structure of these databases with the system global area and all the different components. So just, take a look at these and be familiar. Yeah, so all this Oracle stuff is relevant. What these different files do is relevant. These different data block extent segments. So this architecture is pretty common around databases, the way they do that here, even in non-Oracle databases. So, and then, Oracle specifically, you should know this stuff here. All of this stuff is good. So you should know what JDBC is and what it's used for. Again, the broad categories of MySQL here, and similarly for MariaDB. So yeah, these categories, what we're talking about, you should know this stuff. Again, but not in more detail than we're showing here. You should be familiar with the acid and cap theorem and be able to describe them, and base as well. This is so this is the eventual consistency that so this is the solution to the CAP theorem. And this is, how you get around it in things like Amazon. I think we talked about this in class. A time series databases and what they're for. The characteristics of NoSQL. Some of these, the different types of NoSQL databases and examples. Those are good test questions, these few slides right here. And then how they're structured. So yeah, all this is good exam material. So yeah, all this stuff is relevant. But not the history lesson so much, but yeah. All this stuff is good. Okay, so yeah. All right, ESB, messaging and transactions. So yeah, the different, just at a high level, you should know what SOA is, and similarly, these types of definitions of ESB, how you can do SOA without. So yeah, these examples, with and without, and how it fits together. What is Conaway's law? Some different standards for integration. You should know these. The structure of a SOA architecture, for example. What is an ESB? These components and the architecture. And what do we do with it? And what are the benefits? Again. So how these things can fit together with, multiple queues or a single queue. So, what these different things are and how they fit together. Yeah, you might want to check out that link there. So again, these patterns described at a high level, what the different categories are, these different patterns and how they fit. So yeah, you should just know all these. Let's see. So yeah, these basic concepts you should understand. All this stuff is you should all know this. Yeah, all this stuff here. So let's see. So we did a homework assignment on service mix, so you should be familiar with these different components and what they do, how they fit. Okay, so that's that one. Wow, we're just zipping right through this thing. All right, so this is analytics and enterprise tools. So this, the BI stuff, the high level. I love that chart. It's such a beautiful, cool idea. But so yeah, just these general categories and the processing chain that we were talking about. Just be aware of these high level things. Not too much detail here. Right, so most likely, yeah, so you should understand this Panda architecture and all the different components. And I won't make you know that stuff, but, right, so we had a Tableau homework, so you might have a question about, like, so if you didn't do this Tableau homework, although I think, yeah. Oh yeah, this was a group assignment, so yeah, there might be something like that.
Actually, the Tableau homework is waiting for you for some instructions for you. Actually, we received a message from the TA yesterday
Really?
saying for us to not deliver the homework, that you would give us more instructions about it.
What instructions? What do you have a
I
question
don't know.
about it?
No, I know.
Just say that
He
don't
said,
delete-
yeah.
Yeah.
Go on, what?
Just don't submit the homework till you get some instruction from the professor on Friday.
It's on Canvas. He sent to us yesterday.
You didn't send it to me. I don't know. Anyway.
Okay, can you just submit the one that we did already?
Yeah, maybe you can
You don't
submit
need more
what we did.
instruction.
Just submit. Look.
I don't know.
Just submit. I'm going to give
Okay.
everybody full credit. Just submit whatever you got. I mean, come
Okay.
on. You only don't get full credit if you don't submit it. How about that?
That's
Yeah,
That's cool.
Yeah, the homeworks are mostly just for your use. I don't really grade them that closely, in case you haven't noticed. No, that was all right, so that takes us to, oh yeah, the security one. So mostly what I would say here is so mostly we're looking at, look, you're not all Java programmers, you're not all C programmers, so I'm not too interested that you know all the programming stuff as just the techniques and the ideas of, when we're talking about a buffer overflow attack, what is it, right? What is how do they actually work? More than, writing code to prevent it or stuff like that. Because we gave, there's a lot of examples here, but it's mostly this, high level stuff, especially like the hacker mindset stuff, common attacks. So just, you should understand these attacks conceptually, but not necessarily on a writing code level. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I don't know if I need to go through all these slides, but just go through these things and keep that in mind where you don't have to memorize code examples, but just understand. But as far as this stuff, like, what is CAPEC and what are these patterns and, how do you look things up there? That's all good stuff. What are the variations of hacking, for example? So yeah, this sorts of thing, like right here, these different categories and what people want to do, that's good stuff. So yeah, you can, and so yeah, just understand these characteristics, because these kind of, span programming language boundaries. This could apply to anything, really. But when we get down into, specific examples in C, I'm not going to ask you stuff like that. And then even in, like if we go forward, there's some really specific examples here. Yeah, like here, I'm not going to ask you to, figure out how to fix this SQL injection flaw by doing this, right? That would be just torture. Because I can't really expect everyone to know Java. That wouldn't be fair. So yeah, don't worry about that sort of thing. But again, just be aware at the high level of, what we're talking about. And, these sorts of things, again, I'm not going to ask you to write JavaScript, but you should be aware that, for example, it's doing this. So you should be able to explain each of these, at a high level type of thing. So again, all these things you should be able to just explain at a high level. All right, let's see if there's anything else. But yeah, all this stuff, forget it. I mean, that would just be impossible. Mostly I put this stuff here because, if you're ever in a job where you actually have to, this actually could be helpful, especially the Java stuff if you're writing Java code, because it's not always well known how to do this correctly. Yeah, but so these rules are good, some high level algorithm stuff. I don't even think we went through all this stuff, but yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about all the, how to secure Linux type of thing. Mostly that was just there for, again, your edification. But anything where you say, fundamental flaw or rules or things like that, those are good things to remember. And this, secure development lifecycle type stuff is always good. Just to understand, what's a good idea. All right, and then, so I might ask you a question on, the basics of this, so that if you've done it, you could answer, for example, that sort of thing. All right, and then that should take us. Yeah, so I'm not going to go through today's lecture again, but so yeah, but I mean, in general, you should understand these standards and what they, where they fit at a high level. I'm not going to ask you, in great detail, but so all these survey things and the graphs and stuff, don't worry about that. But just understand the taxonomies and just again, a broad description of what these frameworks, do in their basics, that, that ITIL is a European standard, something like that, but not, I'm not gonna ask you any really difficult questions, but, just like what we talked about, these service designs, that they go around in a circle, and it consists of these, transition and operation and design, that sort of thing, and then what these categories are, and how they fit, that sort of thing. All right, and then, so yeah, like TOGAF and what its various characteristics are, and then we went through some of these case studies, so just again, at a high level, understand these things, so that's basically what I'm looking for. Does that make sense? Fair enough?
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, so, speaking of which, all right, so this is the homework assignment for number 8, which basically consists of, you download this free copy of EA, and then you can just, basically you're going to practice building a model using EA, and then you submit the model.
Today?
No, this is due, well, I mean, you can do it in class, but it's a regular homework
So
assignment. It's not
nothing right and wrong here. Just we need to
due.
design.
No, yeah, just to play around with the tool and build a model and submit it. But, so we could do it in class, or it's just, the homework assignment is not due until the last day of class, but
Okay.
I don't have anything else for in class, so you can either, so the final exam will be for 2 hours. I'm not sure, it probably won't be in this room. I don't have a location